Amina had dreamed of this moment for years. She worked long nights in Kampala's noisy markets, selling whatever she could, saving every coin, and refusing small luxuries just so she could one day open a bakery of her own. She wanted a place filled with the smell of fresh bread, the sweetness of cakes, and the warmth of love in every corner. At last, the day arrived. Her bakery doors were painted bright, the shelves stacked with her very first batch of bread and cakes. She invited everyone she loved, her parents, her brothers and sisters, her cousins, people who had promised they would cheer for her on this special day. That morning, she put on her best dress, her heart beating fast, her hands shaking as she held the golden scissors meant to cut the ribbon. She looked around at the crowd and saw neighbours, shopkeepers, and even strangers who had come out of curiosity. Smiling faces surrounded her, clapping and waiting for her to begin. But when her eyes searched for the people she expected most, her family's seats were empty. She forced a smile for the cameras, but inside, her heart broke. She cut the ribbon with trembling hands, pretending to be strong, though tears burned at the edge of her eyes. She had imagined her family standing beside her, cheering louder than anyone. Instead, she stood alone. At that moment, she decided she would not beg for their support. She would let her success speak for her. The morning of the opening felt like a dream. The little street outside Amina's bakery was full of life. Children held balloons, neighbours clapped for her, and even a few journalists came with cameras to capture the story of a young woman chasing her dream. Strangers peeked through the glass windows, excited by the smell of warm bread and fresh cakes drifting out into the air. The buzz of voices and laughter made it feel like a festival. People who barely knew her stood proudly, waiting to cheer for her. But when Amina turned to the chairs she had carefully arranged at the front, her heart sank. The seats with her family's names on them were empty. She had spent nights imagining this moment. She thought her parents would sit in the front row, smiling proudly. She believed her sisters would be shouting her name, and her cousins would be clapping the loudest. After all, they had promised. They had said yes when she invited them. She trusted them to be there, just as they had always told her family was the most important thing. But now, in the middle of all the joy and noise, their absence was louder than anything else. Still, Amina straightened her back and held her scissors tightly. The cameras pointed at her, and everyone clapped as she smiled. But behind the smile, her heart was breaking. She felt the sting of tears rising, but she refused to let them fall. She did not want the world to see her pain, so she lifted her chin, cut the ribbon with steady hands, and the crowd erupted in cheers. She laughed, but inside it was only silence. She posed for pictures, standing tall beside her cakes, her bread, her dream finally alive. People congratulated her, shook her hand, and even asked for interviews. They told her how proud they were, how inspiring her story was. But in the middle of all the praise, she kept glancing toward those empty chairs. Each time she looked, it felt like another piece of her heart was breaking. The people who should have been by her side, who should have been the first to believe in her, had chosen not to come. That night, after the bakery doors closed and the crowd went home, she sat alone at one of the tables. The smell of sugar and butter still filled the air, but it no longer felt sweet. She rested her head on her folded arms and let the tears she had held back finally fall. She whispered to herself that maybe her dream was too small for her family. Maybe they didn't see the beauty she saw in it. But as the moonlight fell through the bakery window, Amina made a quiet promise. If her family could not see her worth, then she would not waste her strength begging for their approval. She would pour all her love into the people who showed up, the ones who believed in her, even if they were strangers. One day, she told herself, her success would be so bright that even those who doubted her would have no choice but to see it. And with that thought, she wiped her tears, smiled softly, and prepared to open her bakery again at sunrise. Days after the opening, Amina's bakery was slowly becoming known in the neighborhood. People walked in with curiosity, bought her bread, tasted her cakes, and left with smiles. She welcomed every customer warmly, even when she was exhausted. But in her heart, she was still carrying the heavy question. Why had her own family not shown up? They had promised her. They had told her. They would be there. She replayed the image of those empty seats again and again. It hurt more than she wanted to admit. One evening, while she was buying flour at the market, she overheard two women talking. They were distant relatives, whispering to each other as if it were a secret. One said, "Did you hear? Her family didn't come because they think the bakery is too small. They say it is a silly dream, not worth their time." The other laughed and added, "They believe she will fail in a few months. That's why they went to the cousin's engagement party instead. At least that was big and flashy." Amina froze. Their words cut through her like a knife. She pretended not to hear, but inside her chest burned with pain. So that was the reason. Her own parents, her brothers, her sisters, her cousins, people she had loved and trusted, had laughed at her dream. They thought her little bakery, the one she worked for years to build, was nothing. They hadn't just ignored her, they had mocked her. That night, she sat alone in her bakery after everyone left. She stared at the shelves where the bread had sold out, at the empty trays that once held cakes people had loved. She thought about how strangers had cheered for her, how customers had thanked her, how children had licked their fingers with joy after tasting her cookies. These people saw her dream, yet her own family had chosen to laugh behind her back. Tears welled in her eyes, but she wiped them quickly. She would not cry for them again. Instead, she sat up straight and whispered to herself, "Let them laugh. Let them think I will fail." She knew that silence was stronger than anger. She would not fight them with words, nor would she beg for their respect. She would answer them in a language they could not ignore: success. Quietly, she began planning. She wrote new recipes. She thought about new ideas. She dreamed bigger than before. When customers came, she gave them more than bread. She gave them kindness, warmth, and the feeling of home. Every coin she earned, every smile she created, was her secret revenge. She wanted her family to watch from far away, to realize too late that the silly little bakery they mocked was turning into something powerful. The whispers behind her back no longer broke her. They fueled her. She turned her pain into strength, her loneliness into determination. In her heart, she knew the day would come when those who laughed would stand outside her door, begging for a place beside her. And when that day came, she would remember these whispers, not with anger, but with the quiet smile of someone who rose higher than anyone believed she could. Every morning before the sun came up, Amina tied her apron, lit the ovens, and filled her small bakery with the smell of fresh bread and sweet cakes. She worked with her hands until they ached, but she never complained. Her joy came from watching the dough rise, from seeing her little shop glow with warmth, and from hearing the first knock on the door as early customers arrived. What started as a small and quiet bakery slowly began to stir the attention of the neighborhood. People who once passed by without a glance now stopped because the scent of her baking was too hard to resist. At first, a few children came in with coins clutched tightly in their hands, excited to buy her small sugar cookies. Then, students started showing up, carrying their books, choosing her bakery as a safe and calm place to study while sipping tea. Workers from nearby shops began dropping in daily, saying they couldn't start their morning without her bread. Soon, it wasn't just about the food. It was about the way Amina greeted every customer as if they were family, the way she listened to their stories, and the way her laughter filled the shop. Word spread faster than she could have ever imagined. Neighbors told their friends, and friends told strangers. People whispered, "Have you tried the little bakery down the street? You'll never forget the taste." Within weeks, her shelves were empty before noon. She would bake all night, but still the demand was greater than what she could supply. The once quiet sidewalk in front of her shop now buzzed with life, filled with people waiting for a chance to buy her bread. Lines wrapped around the block, and some customers even joked they should start reserving their cakes days in advance. The same bakery her family had mocked was now alive with energy, laughter, and joy. Students celebrated birthdays there, mothers brought their children after school, and couples shared slices of cake on quiet evenings. Her little bakery had become the heartbeat of the community, a place where people came not only to eat, but to feel at home. Amina often stood behind the counter, looking at the line outside her door, and felt tears sting her eyes. Not from sadness this time, but from gratitude. She remembered the empty seats at her opening, the whispers that called her dream too small. Yet here she was, proving them wrong without saying a single word. Her success was not built on grand promises or wealth. It was built on her hands, her recipes, her kindness, and her refusal to give up. Each clap of the cash register, each smiling face that left her shop was her quiet victory. People didn't just come for bread. They came because they believed in her. The bakery that her family had dismissed had turned into something far greater than she had ever dreamed. And as she locked the doors each night, exhausted but proud, she whispered to herself, "This is only the beginning." One morning, as the sun rose and the smell of warm bread floated through the air, Amina was arranging trays of her famous vanilla bean cake on the counter. The bakery was already busy. Students filled the corner tables, workers rushed in to grab breakfast, and children pressed their noses against the glass, pointing at cookies. Among the crowd, a tall man in a sharp suit quietly stepped inside. He was not like the usual customers. His shoes shined, his watch glimmered, and his eyes scanned the shop with great interest. Without introducing himself, he ordered a slice of the vanilla bean cake that had become the pride of her bakery. Amina served it with her usual smile, not knowing who he was. The man took a small bite, then paused. He closed his eyes, savouring the soft, rich flavour. Bite after bite, his expression changed from curiosity to delight. When he finished, he asked for a second slice, then leaned across the counter. In a calm but serious voice, he said, "Who made this cake?" Amina laughed softly, a little shy, and replied, "I did, sir. Every recipe here is mine." The man nodded slowly, then introduced himself as the owner of one of the biggest hotel chains in East Africa. His name carried weight, but to Amina, it felt almost unreal. He explained that he had travelled to many cities, tasted desserts from famous chefs, but never had he tasted something so pure, so unforgettable. Then he looked at her and said words that made her heart skip. "I want this cake in all my hotels." Amina froze. She thought she had misheard him. But he continued, offering her a deal worth millions. He wanted her to supply cakes and desserts not just for one hotel, but for every single resort under his chain, stretching across East Africa. She felt the room spinning. Just weeks ago, she was baking in a tiny kitchen, praying her bread would sell. And now, a stranger was offering to turn her dream into something bigger than she had ever dared imagine. The customers in the shop overheard parts of the conversation, and whispers spread quickly. "Did he just say millions?" someone gasped. Others pulled out their phones, already sending messages. By the time the man left, the news had started moving like fire through the city. The small bakery that everyone once ignored had just landed a deal that could change everything. Amina went to the back room, sat down, and buried her face in her hands. Tears of joy rolled down her cheeks. She thought about the nights she went hungry to save money, the times she walked home late from the market with aching feet, the day she cut the ribbon alone because her family didn't believe in her. Every sacrifice suddenly made sense. The bakery they mocked as too small was no longer just a bakery. It was now the beginning of a multi-million-dollar empire. That evening, her phone wouldn't stop ringing. Journalists wanted interviews, business owners wanted meetings, and her customers filled the shop more than ever before. Amina stood behind the counter, still wearing her flour-stained apron, realizing that her life had changed forever. The city was buzzing about her success, but inside, she was calm. She knew this was only proof of what she had believed all along, that even the smallest dream, if nurtured with love and patience, could grow into something far greater than anyone imagined. The moment the deal with the hotel chain was announced, Amina's life turned upside down. Reporters crowded outside her bakery, cameras flashed as customers lined up earlier than ever, and her name was suddenly on everyone's lips. People called her the Queen of Cakes, the woman who had turned flour, sugar, and patience into a fortune. But along with the praise came something she did not expect: her family. The same people who once laughed at her dream now could not stay away. Her phone began buzzing non-stop. At first, she thought it was customers or journalists, but when she checked, her heart sank. The messages were from her parents, her siblings, and her cousins. They all wrote the same thing. Long paragraphs of fake congratulations filled with emojis, calling her our pride, our star, and our blood. Some even wrote as if they had always been by her side, saying, "We knew you would make it." Amina read the messages silently, her lips pressed into a thin smile. She remembered the empty chairs on her opening day, the whispers that her bakery was too small, and the laughter behind her back. Now suddenly, they wanted to claim her. The messages didn't stop at congratulations. Soon came the requests. One cousin asked for a loan to start his own business. A brother insisted she give him a top job in her bakery chain. Another relative said she should buy them a car because family always shares blessings. Some even demanded she send money monthly, as if it was her duty now that she was rich. The flood of greed, disguised as love, poured into her phone until she stopped opening the messages at all. But it did not end there. One afternoon, as she was serving customers, she heard a commotion outside. She looked through the window and froze. Her family had shown up, dressed in their best clothes, smiling wide for the cameras waiting outside. They posed in front of her bakery, hugging each other, pretending to celebrate her success as if they had been her biggest supporters from the very beginning. Some even waved at her through the glass, motioning for her to come outside and join the performance. Amina stayed where she was, her face calm, her heart steady. The customers inside her shop noticed too. They exchanged looks, some whispering, because they knew the truth, that these people had abandoned her when it mattered most. Reporters, unaware of the full story, took pictures of the happy family reunion. Her relatives laughed and clapped for the cameras, acting as though they had always believed in her dream. But Amina only wiped her hands on her apron and returned to her work. She served her customers, she checked her ovens, and she smiled at the people who had truly been there for her. She refused to step outside and give her relatives the attention they craved. That night, when the bakery was quiet again, she sat at one of the tables and thought about how life had turned. Success had drawn her family back, not love. They had ignored her when her dream was fragile, but now that it was shining, they wanted a piece of it. Amina sighed deeply, but did not feel anger. Instead, she felt clarity. Their return was not about her, it was about her success, and she promised herself that no matter how many times they knocked, she would never let them take away what they had not helped her build. The first anniversary of Amina's bakery was not just another event. It was a symbol of how far she had come. From cutting a ribbon alone with shaking hands to running a chain of bakeries across cities, she had built something that no one could ignore. To celebrate, she decided to do it in style. She rented a grand hall in Nairobi, decorated with golden lights, fresh flowers, and tables filled with her finest desserts. Invitations went out to her employees, her loyal customers, her neighbors, and even the journalists who had first covered her story. The room was buzzing with excitement before the night had even begun. When the evening started, Amina walked in wearing a flowing gown, her head held high. The crowd clapped and cheered for her, their eyes shining with admiration. But among the guests were faces she had not invited directly, her family. They arrived in expensive suits and glittering dresses, strutting into the hall as if they owned it. They smiled widely, shook hands with strangers, and posed for pictures with the cake displays, acting as if they had supported her from the very beginning. Amina watched them quietly, but she did not say a word. The program moved along with laughter, music, and speeches from employees who shared how working at the bakery had changed their lives. Customers spoke about how her shop had become their second home, a place of comfort and joy. The atmosphere was warm, genuine, and filled with love, the very love her family had once denied her. Then came the moment everyone was waiting for. The MC took the microphone and invited Amina to the stage. "Tonight," he said, "we celebrate a woman who turned her dream into a reality. And now she will share her gratitude to those who stood by her through the journey." All eyes turned to her. Her relatives sat up straighter in their seats, their smiles wide, ready to receive the applause they thought they deserved. Amina stepped up, her glass of champagne in hand. She looked around the hall slowly, her gaze settling on the people who mattered most. Then she smiled. "I want to thank those who never left my side," she began. Her voice was calm but steady, carrying across the room. "The ones who believed in me when my dream was nothing more than a tiny bakery on a small street. The ones who showed up when it counted." She lifted her glass high and pointed, not to her family, but to her employees standing proudly in their uniforms, to the neighbors who had cheered her from day one, and to the loyal customers who had lined up every morning, rain or shine. The hall erupted with applause, cheers, and even tears. People stood on their feet, clapping for her and for each other. Amina's employees hugged one another, overwhelmed with pride. The neighbors wiped their eyes, touched by her recognition. The customers cheered so loudly the room shook with joy. Her family, however, sat frozen. The smiles faded from their faces. Some looked down at their plates. Others shifted uncomfortably in their chairs. But none of them clapped. They had expected the spotlight, but instead, they were left in silence. Their shame was visible, and yet Amina never once looked in their direction. She had given her gratitude only to those who truly earned it. That night, as the celebration continued, Amina felt lighter than ever. She didn't need anger or revenge. Her silence had been enough. By lifting others, she had shown the world exactly who had stood with her and who had walked away. Her payback was not loud, but it was powerful, and it echoed louder than any words ever could. That night, after the laughter and applause of the anniversary faded, Amina returned to her hotel room in Nairobi. The glow of success still surrounded her, but her heart was calm. She sat at the desk with a pen in her hand and thought about everything: the long nights in Kampala's markets, the empty chairs on her opening day, the whispers behind her back, and the silent strength that carried her here. She remembered how her family RSVP'd yes, but never showed, how they laughed at her dream, and how they only came back when the cameras were flashing. That memory guided her as she opened a folder of papers, her will and trust fund. She began to write with steady hands. Her millions, earned from flour, sugar, and determination, would not go to those who mocked her. Instead, she set aside the fortune for the people who truly mattered. Her little daughter, who was her greatest joy. Her hard-working employees, who had stood by her from the beginning. And a community foundation that would help children and families who needed a chance, just like she once did. As she signed the final page, Amina felt no bitterness. She wasn't punishing her family. She was simply protecting her legacy from the people who had abandoned her when it counted most. The ribbon-cutting day replayed in her mind, her standing alone with trembling hands while the crowd cheered. That moment had taught her everything she needed to know. Her family had been absent then, and in her future, they would remain absent too. She closed the folder, smiled softly, and whispered to herself, "This is my final cut."